As a pro photographer that's run countless on-location workshops now, I've noticed that the biggest problem that photographers struggle with is composition. So if that sounds like you, stick around, because today I'm going to reveal my main compositional approach that I use actually with every shot, even if sometimes I don't even realize it. And it's a technique that I like to call the reflective method. And yeah, this is something that I have done for years to great success actually. And stay around until the end of the video where I'll share a practical exercise actually that you can do to make this process even easier. So what exactly is this technique that is so important to me? Well, simply put, it's about pre-visualizing your final photograph whilst you're out on a photo shoot and deliberately taking the time to be mindful and to reflect on whatever it was that caught your eye in the first place, way before you've even taken out your camera. Now, of course, to begin with, this all starts with something that just kind of catches your eye in the first place. We all know that initial spark of just, oh, that looks quite nice. Maybe there's a photograph there, and this thing that catches your eye could be anything. It could be a tree, a rock formation. It could even be something less obvious, like the way the light is hitting the land in a particular way. But once something has caught your attention enough for you to want to stop and investigate it, it's what comes next that to me is so important. This is when we need to take a moment to just reflect and stop and look and listen. It actually sounds like those signs that you see on railway crossings, doesn't it? Stop, look, listen. That is a perfect way of remembering it actually. But yeah, we've got to take some time to just relax. Importantly, with no gear. Bag on the floor, no tripod, definitely no camera, and just observe how our subject is interacting with its surroundings. And this starts the process of pre-visualizing your composition. Now, I want to get into how this process looks in real life, you know, when you're physically out and about with your camera, because it's all well and good me explaining this to you, but I figured I can go one better than that and actually show you. And to really simplify things, I've realized I always follow a bit of a three-step method when I'm out shooting. And I'm going to use this scene that you can see behind me to explain this approach. So when I first arrived at this location, the first thing that caught my eye was this pair of Scots pine trees here, but I didn't jump straight into thinking about composition, and I certainly didn't reach for my camera or anything. I just stopped to simply observe and give myself the time to be mindful about my environment. And this first step was all about understanding the subject and its surroundings. It was a moment to connect with the environment a little bit and to feel out the potential for a photograph. That is it. And after observing the scene and getting a feel for the subject, I then moved on to the second step, where I suppose I began actively working on the composition. I started by considering the elements that could complement the two trees, such as this road actually that leads off into the distance, or the grasses down by my feet, or the hills right off behind the trees. I then walked around the scene and started to think a little bit more about some basic compositional rules, like the rule of thirds and leading lines, and I explored a few different angles and perspectives. And really, this step was where I began to pre-visualize the shot. It's where it all started to come together. And by the way, this is all still well before I'd even touched my camera. I didn't need my camera. I didn't need to know which settings I should be using. I didn't need to know where I was going to focus, because, you know, none of that stuff mattered without a composition to work with in the first place. And then when I'd finally got a bit of a composition in mind, it was then time to move on to the third and final step, where I'd actually take out my camera and dial in the settings, etc., etc. But by this stage, you can maybe see now that I'd already done most of the hard work in creating the photograph. It was then just a case of turning my vision literally into a file on a memory card. Now, I was just thinking about this on this YouTube channel, when I'm explaining to you why I've chosen to take a photograph in a certain way. That's all well and good, that's brilliant, and I'd like to think you get a lot of value from that. But what you never see, and that's what this video is about really, is how have I gone about kind of actually framing this shot up. And the reason is, this is what I've thought about, is because it's actually so boring for me to actually show you that on video. But it's ironic because for me, it is absolutely the most important part of composition. And for this particular shot, like I said, the elements that I'd sort of noticed at first were the two trees. They were what caught my eye. And then it was a case of, can I use this road? You know, there are only so many things that are surrounding my subjects that I can physically use in my photograph. And here, yeah, it was the road, the grasses, the hills behind the trees were gonna have to feature whether I liked it or not. The sky is really nice, and I've tried to combine all of them elements into this composition. And as much as I love that process before you've got your camera out, where you're just starting to frame things up, you're using your imagination, you're trying to marry elements together, I do think it's very important to mention as well that there is always that danger of falling into that bracket of overthinking, where you're trying to do too much, you're trying to bring too much into the photograph. And this is another thing that's really hard for me to show you behind the scenes all the time, that I'm often trying to take things out of my compositions and simplify it even more. And that is what I've done with this image, really. And as for how I'm photographing it, it's a black and white, it's a long exposure, probably about 4 minutes. And again, it is so simple. Now, some of you may actually remember this, but I've actually photographed this scene before about 3 winters ago, I think, something like that. And I got this shot that I was so happy with. It was, again, such a simple image, same composition, but with the snowy conditions and the quiet colors. And I felt like it worked really well, you know. And the reason I wanted to return to this spot was to showcase to you, I guess, another aspect of pre-visualization. And that is to imagine how a scene looks under different lighting conditions, or even in different seasons. If you think a location has more potential than the day of your visit, note it down, you know, and plan a return trip. A lot of photographers that I know would argue definitely that pre-visualization combined with a commitment to return is the ultimate recipe to good photos. But I think the winter image is probably better, but I would love to know, well, I mean, firstly, if any of you remember me taking the shot of these trees, but also if you prefer the summer version or the winter version. Let me know down in the comments section. Now, I actually forgot to share some deeper insights that are crucial for mastering this compositional technique. Luckily, I stumbled upon a spot further up this track that will help me explain these points perfectly. Oh no, absolute tomato head here. I've forgotten sun cream and I'm definitely burning here. Right, I have forced myself to just stop and press record on my video camera because I'm at that very first step of the 3-step method. In fact, I'm not even at the first step just yet. I wanted to say to you, I think there's a little spark. I think I found something. And all it is at the minute, nowhere near even thinking about photography just yet, is, oh, this is a nice stream. The hike so far has been fairly bland. Everything's been quite flat and dull. And then boom, all of a sudden, there's potential because this stream looks nice. And as a photographer, it just gives me a little bit of a feeling that I'm sure you're familiar with, of maybe there's a photograph here. And yeah, I wanted to stop and say that to you because then we'll move on to my little 3-step method. So same as before, step number 1 of the 3-step method, I'm just gonna take off my bag. I'm just gonna dump it on the floor down here with all the ticks. Put it down there and just chill. The most that I'm gonna do at the minute is maybe wander up and down the beck just a little bit, eyes on, see if there's anything deeper that catches my interest and gives me a deeper spark. But yeah, again, really important, no camera, no tripod, nothing. Just chilling and getting to know my environment a little bit more, that's all. So I'm just grabbing my bag to move upstream, only about 20 meters because I found something. But before I show you, there's this whole other side to this 3-step method thing that I absolutely have to talk about because it is so important, and I'm so glad that I've just remembered it. And that is that so much of the time, again, this is really frustrating because you never see this on my YouTube channel. You never see this with other photographers. Only you experience this. And that is, most of the time we are abandoning this 3-step method. We're abandoning taking a photograph. It's step 1. That's just the reality. It happens all the time with me where, oh my gosh, there's a little idea. I think I'm going to get a photograph here. I get really excited. I start thinking about getting my camera out, and then I just can't make anything work. But what I really want to say here is that don't let that get you down. It's so common. Loads of other photographers that I've been out with are constantly abandoning ideas at step one because they've just not managed to make it work. And it's fine. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's fine. Don't feel down on yourself if that happens to you quite a lot. It happens to me the majority of the time. And I'm not just flat out, oh, look, there's a photograph there, and then I go and get an amazing photograph every time. That's rare. But anyway, I'm going to move on to step number 2 now of this method because I found something. But first, I want to show you it because I wouldn't have found this without applying step number 1. I came a little bit further upstream like this, just looking at the cascades, which is what caught my eye in the first place, remember? And then I spotted these beautiful little foxgloves here, and I thought to myself, perhaps I could make something out of them. And this brings me on to another very important point. And that is quite simply not to get too tunnel visioned on what caught your eye in the first place. Yes, if you see a beautiful tree or a beautiful rock formation out at sea, most of the time your instinct was right. But all I'm saying is don't get too tunnel visioned on that subject because you could end up missing out on other opportunities. And I'm glad this happened because, you know, it's a perfect example. And again, this is something that's very real. This is the reality of the behind the scenes of what happens to me a lot is I found something different. And again, if I didn't apply step 1 of this method, I'd have never found these beautiful little foxgloves. And I'll talk you through my idea here, again, before I'm thinking about getting my camera out. So just like my first image, actually, I'm trying to keep this really simple. And what I'm probably going to do is get really in close to the foxgloves, something like that, and just use the lack of colour off in the background to act as, I suppose, a little bit of colour contrast, because obviously these foxgloves flowers here are so beautifully vibrant that I can use that to my advantage. So this is me now in step 2, really trying to create the frame almost, trying to create the composition in my mind's eye. And again, you know, I've not got my camera out or anything just yet, but I think up close, something like that, probably a square crop, is going to work really well. So now I've had a good bit of time implementing step number 2 of this little 3-step method. It is now finally time to, you know, bring my vision of this photograph into the real world by using my camera. It's as simple as that. And I've said this before on my YouTube channel, but in this 3rd stage, it's important to mention as well, once I start looking through the viewfinder or the LCD screen, I may actually start disagreeing with myself a little bit and second guessing the decisions that I made during step number 1 and step number 2. And I would actually encourage that kind of process whilst you're in this 3rd step, because once you've got your camera, you probably know yourselves, things are a little bit different when we start looking through our viewfinder or using the LCD screen, or sometimes when I'm in this 3rd step, I still don't get my camera out and I start using my phone to maybe frame up my idea just so I can see it on a little screen. I do think it helps, and yeah, that's when I just see it as like maybe a little bit more fine tuning. But with this particular image, I pretty much stuck with what my idea was during the 2nd step. And I brought it in actually shutter priority mode, and I'm in at about 200mm. It's on 1/160th of a second. Fairly quick. Aperture I think was on f6.3, ISO's on auto. Getting in really close to the beautiful little foxgloves here and bringing my idea to life by getting a file on my memory card. All right, so here's the practical exercise for you that I said I'd share at the start of this video. A bit of a bonus tip for you. When you try this pre-visualization technique, try shooting in auto mode and even in JPEG format. And this way you can skip the technical stuff and purely focus on the creative side, and maybe even don't bother with a tripod, you know, and just go fully handheld. This will sort of simplify the whole process even more and will help you stay focused on composition without getting distracted or bogged down by settings. Now, to take your pre-visualization skills even further, I often think about how I'll post-process my image whilst I'm taking it. And you can click on this video that's popping up now to see how this extra step can improve your photography even more. I really hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gents, and I'll see you on the next adventure. Out!